time. Jackie, thank you so much for offering to head up this panel. It's really important that, and I was talking to Congressman Lou Carrera this morning, and he agrees that we do have a unique opportunity to get some stuff done during this crisis. So this was your idea, this is your panel, and I would like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to my panelists for being here today. I am super excited to talk about what I've been obsessed with lately, and that is something the former SAC cannabis czar, Joe Devlin, said to me, which was, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so I've been really trying to think outside the COVID-19 box, which is the title of this panel, of ways in which we can ease up the regulations and the taxes and the overburdensome and difficult market that everyone is currently surviving barely in at the moment. And so we've got a couple operators here, we've got an attorney, we've got a great panel full of people that also are activists, and they're all doing really amazing things. And given the just tidal wave of news that comes at us every day now, a lot of it's being overshadowed and overlooked. And so I wanted to take a moment to highlight what these guys are up to, the tasks that they're accomplishing, the hurdles that they're clearing, and make sure that everyone's aware that there are people that are doing some really amazing things right now. So I'm gonna give the floor over to Jackie Suebach, who right now is currently, she just currently qualified an initiative in the city of West Hollywood to ease the regulations there. And I'm gonna let her talk about what her role in the industry is and what she's up to. And then I'll introduce the rest of the panel after that and start with some questions. Take it away, Jackie.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you, Susan, for putting this all together. This is so great. So yes, I'm Jackie Suebach. I've been working very hard in West Hollywood for the last several years, and we fortunately just qualified right under the wire of the pandemic with our signatures for the ballot in November to fix a lot of ordinance problems that we have, that we've been battling with for well over a year, almost a year and a half now since they awarded licenses. And interestingly enough, a couple of the components of that ballot measure are very relevant to this conversation about thinking out of the box. So just to put some context behind it, our ballot measure is specifically, it's two things. It's retail and it's consumption lounges. And so essentially all of the fixes that would happen if we were to pass this ballot measure would allow for everybody to either stay open that is in threat of being closed, or to have an actual viable business pathway to open on the lounges side. And one of the things that we built into the lounge ballot measure before COVID-19 was the ability to have takeout. And it wasn't in the initial ordinance. It's something we've been battling with for a while now. And it has now, of course, become a really, really important topic as we look at how the social experience of cannabis is going to move forward. We don't have any idea what social experiences in general are going to look like after this. And so we want to make sure that our lounges have the ability to build up a customer base and to serve, to still service, those customers with potentially their own products, with potentially things that they've been manufacturing on their own, and still build that brand and get that message out there. So with a combination of takeout, and I know we've been talking a lot today about curbside delivery, which is actually kind of takeout sort of for a lounge. And then we're also looking at the possibility down the line of actually just delivery in general being added to retailers. I know that in parts of the state and other cities and other counties, they've done that already, but in West Hollywood, it's still a separate license to have delivery. So we're really hoping that we're going to be able to wrap this all up, fold it up together, and make a much more streamlined process going forward.
Thank you, Jackie. And best of luck. Let us know how we can help, okay?
Thank you.
Our next panelist, I'm going to go with James Anthony. James Anthony is an activist at heart, and he has led and succeeded with many referendums and initiatives across the state. I don't think there's anyone more qualified to talk about local ballot initiatives than he is. And so James and I have been brainstorming and trying to come up with ideas and ways to save the industry. And I am super excited to have his brainpower here, and am lucky to call you a friend. So take it away, James.
There we go. Sorry about that. Took me a second to find the button. Thank you so much, Jackie and Susan, for including me on this panel and with all of the amazing panels happening today. Listen, I'm going to try to keep this down to 5 minutes. If that's too long or I run over and you want me to wrap up, just make some sort of frantic hand gesture and I will see that. I want to step back to before March 16th. In early 2020, California cannabis was not in good shape. The combination of overregulation and excessive taxation at both the state and the local level was making it pretty much impossible to run a viable, profitable, above ground, legal licensed industry. And in fact, you know, the industry shrank from 27 medical at 3 billion down to 2018, 2 billion of adult use and medical combined. And I think it has barely crept back up to the 3 billion mark where it was in 2017. That is not a good sign. And it tells us, as we all know very well, that the underground market is alive and well and thriving. Worse yet, 2020 is the year when state and local governments are faced with the prospect of handing out annual permits, annual licenses by the state and so-called final or annual permits by local government. Government does not like to give you a final license, an annual license. Temps, provisionals, whatever, as far as they're concerned, you have no protection there. But once you have a final license, you have a constitutionally protected property right, and it is extremely difficult for them to take that away from you. I don't know if you've noticed this, but nobody ever loses liquor licenses, right? Maybe you get a slap on the wrist, maybe you get a suspension, you say, hey, I don't want a suspension, I'll pay a fine, or God forbid, you're really horrible, they make you transfer it to your sister-in-law. And that is a situation that both state and local government wants to avoid. And this is the year when they were going to start cutting people off for any reason. They think half of us are criminals and gangsters anyway. And if you have any kind of uncertain relationship with the regulations, you are not getting an annual license. So we had those two huge problems anyway, non-viable industry and the huge cut coming as we go into annual licensing. Then we get COVID-19 and we get shelter in place. And we get a little bit of good news, and which I think we rightfully celebrate. We are, quote, essential in California. And, you know, as many of you have helped with every local government in California, we have managed to maintain that essential status and basically continue to allow both retail and the supply chain to operate when huge swaths of the rest of the economy are shut down. That's good news, but where did that come from? That came from our medical history, right? Our status as healthcare operations, that is why we are essential. And we forget that at our peril. And I hate to say it, but a lot of the industry doesn't have a clue of where we came from and how the medical movement struggled for decades to get us to where we are. And it is only because of our medical roots that we continue to survive today. I'm going to take just a couple more minutes and I'm going to do the sort of downside devil's advocacy. Despite that good news, the enemies of cannabis are alive and well. The racist anti-cannabis war on drugs is alive and well in the federal government with many of the states, many local governments, both elected officials and just senior staff. You know, if the fire department has a prejudice against cannabis, your inspections are going to be very difficult. There are many so-called nonprofits, AstroTurf, policy organizations, Kevin Sabet, and Smarter Alternatives to marijuana, who have been fighting us tooth and nail. And they have a strategy now that I think could win for them. I'm going to talk just for 1 minute about what we need to do to prevent that strategy, and then I'm going to tell you what that strategy is, which is extremely dangerous to us. Now more than ever, we need to be politically organized and savvy. We need to be activists, and we need to remember our medical roots. We should never use the word recreational. We should never tolerate the use of the term recreational by our enemies or by misinformed government officials. I am frankly suspicious even of adult use, because this is how we have to frame adult use. Adult use is now over-the-counter wellness medical, right? Any adult can get medical cannabis by showing their ID, the same way they would buy Sudafed in a pharmacy. You go in, you show your ID, you get your medicine, you go home. That's medical, that's wellness. What the so-called medical portion, as opposed to that, is, I would call that doctor-recommended medical. Doctor-recommended medical means that you can get higher amounts and higher dosages for higher need patients. For that, you need a doctor's recommendation. You also get a tax break, and you are also eligible for compassion programs. But they are both medical. There's over-the-counter, and there's doctor recommended. And the reason why that's important is that the attack will come in the same form as the tobacco strategy. The tobacco strategy that succeeded over a decade or so in defeating one of the hugest and most powerful industries in the United States was basically an alliance of health officers. The very same county health officers that have now shut down the economy in this state, because they have the power to do that. They are incredibly powerful. And the strategy goes like this. And we've seen this in the Wall Street Journal and in these bogus scientific studies, like, oh my God, vaping and smoking and nicotine and legal and illegal all gets piled in. Vaping and smoking is bad for you. Vaping and smoking hurts your lungs. You'll get pneumonia. You'll get COVID-19. You'll die. Right? So how can it be medical? It's actually bad for you. That strategy is extremely, extremely threatening, especially if deployed at the local level. And we need to watch out for that, and we need to remember our medical roots. And I will shut up now.
James, I absolutely adore you, and I just think you're brilliant. And I have often struggled with the term recreational and adult use myself, terms. And recently attended a Marco Island City Council meeting where a ban was on the agenda for recreational, which isn't even in Florida yet. And I left there just perplexed. Like, I don't know how to have an argument when it's not about the children anymore, you know, and it's not about the children anymore, but it seems to be Republicans have a problem with adult use / recreational. They're okay with it being medical, but they're not okay with it being recreational. And you just said something that is just, it's profound. We have doctor prescribed medical and over-the-counter medical. And this is the argument I believe you used in Santa Clara County when Santa Clara County did not define adult use as essential. They only defined medical as essential. That's sort of what happened there. Not exactly, but I won't waste anyone's time with the boring details.
Yeah. No, that was important. And I think that the way to think about it is that under Prop 215, marijuana is a crime, right? The possession of marijuana in 1996 was a misdemeanor in California. And so the only way to have any kind of medical use was you needed an exception. You needed a criminal defense, right? And so you had to go to the doctor to get your criminal defense for, you know, what should have been an unscheduled over-the-counter medication. But under Prop 64, we don't have that problem anymore. It is not a crime. And so it's like aspirin. It's like Sudafed. You can just go buy it. And that is the difference between Prop 215 medical requires a rec. Prop 64 medical over-the-counter doesn't require a rec any more than aspirin or Sudafed if you have higher needs, higher dosages, need a tax break, need compassion, then you need a doctor recommended.
I love it. It's brilliant. Thank you. And before I go on to our next guest, Can you talk about what you've spent this quarantine time doing the most of? I believe you've been very active in assisting us in being designated an essential business in many jurisdictions, and just want to know more about whatever else you're up to.
So again, all politics is local, especially since we have, local opt-out in California. We have dual licensing. And so, I will say that the one opportunity, I'm sure other people will talk about this, is every city in California is broke, right? Which is going to suddenly open their minds to the possibility of having cannabis businesses in their jurisdiction. And local activists need to be there with a very clear understanding of the medical wellness need for cannabis in their community, as well as jobs, as well as taxes. Take it easy on the taxes. We need local governments competing with each other to drop their taxes. And I just wanted to be sure that this insidious idea that you could somehow distinguish between, okay, medical is essential, but recreational is not, that got no purchase anywhere in California. And so far, so good. But that's going to take ongoing local struggles that, every single person in the movement, in the industry, needs to be actively participating in.
Thank you, James. Okay, my next guest is Dominic Corva, who is a policy professor and has just assisted several northern counties in receiving some of the social equity funds that were made available by the state of California. He is a champion and he is brilliant, and I can't wait for him to tell us what he's up to. And I'm happy to call him my friend too.
Thank you, Jackie. To be clear, in the last 8 months, we've had actually both rounds of California cannabis equity funding. And first of all, I'm the co-director of the Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research at Humboldt State University. I have an appointment in sociology there. I'm also a research associate for the California Center for Rural Policy at Humboldt State University, and the executive director of a nonprofit I founded, the Center for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy. All three of these basically come together in the equity grant application effort, which has been coordinated through CCRP by contracting with Mendocino County, Humboldt County, Lake County, City of Clear Lake, and Nevada County. The latter three are all type 2 applications, which are money so that they can design a program to get more money next year. But between Humboldt and the Mendocino counties, we got $5 million for Northern California counties out of a total of $40 million statewide for equity, which is pretty big chunk. With the idea that in the rural context, obviously we're dealing with rural poverty. We're dealing with trying to transition folks who used to depend on cannabis for their livelihoods into a long-range sustainable economic development program, which is especially important for counties like Humboldt and Mendocino and other places that don't have incredibly diverse economies. This is an economic development thing, and so we're very happy to be able to partner with these counties to help them move forward into the future. And of course, in order for their folks to transition, the whole supply chain has to work, right? And so this is not just about Northern California counties. This is about, creating, I think, an equitable system that small businesses and folks who've been particularly marginalized by the war on drugs have a chance to thrive in. And it can't work unless the whole system works. And this is, the before March, time frame that James was talking about, that was a challenge faced by everybody. And so we're hoping that the lessons that we can learn from equity programs about economic development are the lessons that we can mobilize in the COVID and post-COVID context, which is how do we make this system work? How do we get it to cover the other 70% of the states that it's not allowed in right now? Many of those jurisdictions are historically epicenters for the war on drugs, urban epicenters like Compton, California, and so forth. So I think that the equity paradigm helps us this way with COVID-19, which is, it's the part of the California cannabis system that says the system is actually pretty tough to deal with, that it's difficult to get into and people need help. And this is the case for everyone. And it's certainly especially the case for folks who qualify for equity. And so I think that this is an important perspective to bring forward. I think that right now, in the context of COVID-19, that many of the things that James just said and some of the things that Jackie just said are super important, which is now is when local jurisdictions probably are going to be more interested in opening things up for businesses that are allowable, essential businesses and so forth. But also, I think overcoming maybe a history of stigma in favor of dealing with municipal economic crises that they're facing at the local level. And so I think this is an important angle going forward. I think that the COVID-19 box is both a limit and also an opportunity, in other words. I think that it's something that that allows us to connect with how everyone else is suffering. I think that's very important, both morally, but also politically. That's right now with different avenues being blocked because their bandwidth is all on COVID-19, that this is an opportunity for us to show the rest of California that we're a part of it, even though we maybe haven't been treated that way, but to be gracious about that and to really double down on empathy and compassion and how we're like everybody else. That includes, worker protection. It includes, all of the things that we share with the other businesses and individuals who are suffering, which also means I think that we've got to double down on the local. And I think that, again, it's local jurisdictions that have blocked the implementation of the system, that we need more licenses. So it's not just the bans and so forth, but areas like Los Angeles that need to get their equity, licensees up and running. They also probably need 8 times as many licenses, quite frankly. I think this is an opportunity to overcome some of the other bottlenecks in areas where it's clear that we need more licenses in order to access, the rest of the population that is otherwise going to depend on unlicensed cannabis. So, and the long-term relationship between licensed and unlicensed cannabis to me has to be peaceful, and it's about competing it out of existence, giving consumers a choice and convincing them that it is worth their increasingly scarce money to participate in. I think that's also an important thing that part of the big picture is that as this drags out, people without jobs do not have money and they cannot participate in the system. So this is all very important. So I think that's doubling down on the local, which is where I think we can make the most and community specific impact, which is to also be able to pivot in ways that other businesses are being allowed to pivot towards takeout, delivery, that sort of thing. Removing purely bureaucratic obstacles, essentially, to market openings. In other words, not asking, I think, budgets to take a hit when we ask for regulatory, rationality, basically. So rationalizing irrational regulatory barriers that are actually blocking the possibility for our economies to work and for folks to have access. So that's my take. And as always, I appreciate everyone on the panel and Jackie for doing this. Really appreciate it, Jackie.
Dominic, thank you so much. I'm just going to confirm for both you and James that your thinking is correct. This is presenting an opportunity. I'm watching that opportunity come, and just like you said, it both limits us and creates opportunity. We have to figure out where that line is exactly. So the city of Milpitas, for instance, about a year ago, they had a very strong religious opposition show up and shoot down and kill a year's worth of work that cannabis business advocates had done in creating, they got very close to issuing 10 licenses for retail and got shot down. Now, because the city is looking at their future budget and realizing that they've got a gap and they've got to plug it, decided to throw it into a city council agenda to see if maybe they wanted to put a tax on the November ballot. And the mayor attended his Zoom meeting with a picture of Bob Marley in the background. And this is what made it into the news, which it got shot down again. But I don't know if our industry was there pushing for it. Like you said, we have to show up, right? The opportunities are coming. We've got the potential for Anaheim to open up. Anaheim, who is the home to Disney, we have always said would be one of the last places in the state of California that would ever consider allowing retail next to their precious children, you know, and now we're seeing that might be a possibility. But again, we have to show up. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. And, you know, I look forward to wrapping this panel up with some more thoughts on how we can kind of push the envelope and think outside the COVID-19 box. But I saved the best for last because I have an even more personal story that Mr. Steve D'Angelo probably doesn't even know. And that is that I became a patient 6 years ago, and thanks to Harborside for having a CBD class that I was a part of with David Weddingdress. And I learned all about how to consume CBD. I didn't know anything about it, and it scared me, and it was terrifying. And so I attended that class once a month, and you'll always have a special place in my heart because my personal relationship with cannabis was created because of a program that you created, and you probably don't even know that. And also the best for last because you're working on a project that is very near to my heart. And I'm excited to see that some of my clients are participating and assisting you in your Last Prisoner project. And I know that, and this is something that I wish would be highlighted by the media more, you know, your push to get nonviolent cannabis criminals that are currently locked up out due to coronavirus, you know, due to a pandemic. And I want to hear about that. I want to hear about some of the ideas that you might have when, you know, we all get brainstorming, when we get this kind of power together, like anything is possible. And so I'm excited to now turn it over to Steve D'Angelo.
Well, Jackie, thank you so much for having me. And I hadn't heard the story before, but it's, you know, I love those stories. And it's just the reason that we did the work we did at Harborside was to see the kind of outcome that you just told me about. So, so thank you for sharing that story. I've spent the past 50 years being both a cannabis business person and a cannabis activist. And my activities since COVID hit have reflected those two hats that I wear. On the one hand, when I have my Harborside hat on, I'm chairman emeritus of Harborside Incorporated. And in wearing that hat, I've really been taking a microscope to all of our operations, taking the designation of being an essential business really seriously, and learning how to continue the cannabis supply chain, continue providing the products that our clients rely on for their wellness, and keeping them and our staff as safe as possible at the same time. So that's required a lot of adjustments in the way that we do business. It's required the installation of a lot of new equipment. It's required new training of staff and a lot of communication with our clients. So that's part of what I've been doing, just really trying to tighten that supply chain and make it safe as possible. With my activist hat, I've been focusing on the plight of cannabis prisoners. Even before COVID hit, about a year ago, I launched a new advocacy organization called the Last Prisoner Project. And LPP has a very simple and single-minded mission, which is to make sure that every single cannabis prisoner on planet Earth is released. As we go about building this new legal industry, as some people are lucky enough to start building great careers and even intergenerational wealth, we need to make sure that other people, mostly who come from communities of color who are still imprisoned, have an opportunity to be released and rebuild the lives that were stolen from them, right? The people who are in prison on cannabis charges are not criminals. They were never criminals. They're heroes who carried this healing plant through the darkness of prohibition. And we can't leave them there in prison as we build this new industry, as we spread this reform all around the world. So it was a matter of simple restorative justice before COVID hit, but now it's become a matter of urgent life and death. The prisons in the United States are now places where there is the single highest concentration of COVID in the world. 70% of federal prisoners who have been tested for coronavirus have tested positive. We've already seen many deaths along the way. So we've been focusing now with LPP really on a campaign to make sure that we can assist our constituents as much as possible. And part of that is redoubling our efforts for release. So we've been assisting a number of our clients with petitions for emergency compassionate release. One of them is Michael Thompson. He's 68 years old, in the 27th year of a 60-year sentence. This is in the state of Michigan. He was sentenced for selling 3 pounds of cannabis. He has underlying conditions that make him more vulnerable to COVID, and COVID is in the prison where he's housed. So we're asking people to get in touch with Governor Whitmer and urge her to approve this emergency compassionate release petition for Michael. But Michael's just one of 40,000 cannabis prisoners in the United States, where we are unable to really viably seek compassionate release. We've been focusing on protecting our constituents by getting PPE into the prisons, into shining a light on what's going on there. And you know, some of the stuff that we've seen is just horrifying. There are guards in prisons who are hoarding toilet paper and not giving it to prisoners. Those same prisoners are being, who are being deprived of toilet paper, are being sent into bathrooms to clean themselves, where there's just these horrifying photos. You can see them on the lastprisonerproject.org website, of these grody, awful, tired old sponges that have been sitting there for God knows how long, with grody, ugly, dirty, caked soap on them. And this is what the members of our community, people who did nothing other than grow some cannabis or sell some cannabis or smuggle some cannabis or fix a car that was used to smuggle cannabis, these are the conditions that they're being put in. So we are urgently asking the cannabis community to plug in with lastprisonerproject.org. Thanks for showing our ad there earlier. And that's really been the main focus of my activities. I feel incredibly fortunate to still be employed, to be able to isolate with people that I care about, and to be able to continue my mission. But I'm terribly worried about all of the people who aren't so fortunate. And I think that all of us who are have an obligation to do all we can to come to their aid and rescue them in this dire situation.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for taking on that project. And I, love to find out how I can get more involved, and maybe you can end with that and tell everybody how we can all get more involved. So the title of this panel, Never Let a Good Crisis Go to Waste, Thinking Outside the COVID-19 Box. I'm trying so hard to be inspired to think outside the COVID-19 box. I even bought myself some COVID-19 earrings. Aren't they great? Like, if you know me, you know that I have 482 Google email alerts set to every city in the state, 58 set for every county. I track local regulations closer than pretty much anyone that we know. And I dump all that data into a Facebook group. If you're not a member of my Facebook group, it's called California City and County Regulation Watch. Please do join today. So I read a lot of news, I disseminate a lot of news, and medicine via drone. They're testing it out in a small city. In the United Kingdom, we're seeing that they have relaxed their requirement that medical cannabis patients need a prescription, so they can just go ahead and go to a pharmacy to get some medicine. I'm also seeing that they are allowing cannabis to be shipped via the mail. And so I believe that there are some opportunities that we could all be, exploring outside the COVID-19 box, because right now, we have the conventional policy remedies via legislative, legal, or a local or state ballot initiative. And those are pretty, we've been exploring those three, and there just don't seem to be any possibility of getting any kind of tax relief immediately through those methods. There also doesn't seem to be any way to ease some of the onerous restrictions. And so I'm really hoping that, maybe we can start pushing at the local level. And I'm gonna, shoot this over to both Jackie and James to see what they have to say about, pushing the envelope at the local level. Okay. Prop 64 says that we are, so that local jurisdictions can be more restrictive, but they can't be more lenient in the regs. And we know that's not technically true, because technically businesses are supposed to be 600 feet from any sensitive use. And we know that that is actually a suggestion, and that many cities are not adhering to that and putting businesses closer than, a couple hundred feet. James, is there any way that we can do something like drone technology if we were able to get a city to allow us to test this?
So first of all, about the 600 feet, whoops, there I am. That part of the statute of the Business and Professions Code specifically says that it's 600 feet, straight line, parcel to parcel, unless the local restriction is different. And so it does allow some kind of downward departure. I think Oakland is path of travel, and some of them, certainly lots of them add additional restrictions, but in terms of those schools and youth centers, that can be relaxed because of that. The rest of it, less so. And certainly that 429 pages of administrative regulations, or whatever it is now, you can't really get around, although, local governments have some flexibility. Much as I love the idea of, not only cannabis copter, but let's face it, we need taco copter, and we need taco copter now. That's a thing, by the way. The problem there is the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, is concerned about millions of things flying all over the place, and it is going to come. And when that comes, we will certainly want to be part of that. I mean, I think what it points to in terms of the opportunity prevented by the crisis and not letting it go to waste is that, lots and lots of local governments that have snubbed us in the past are suddenly going to be open-minded. Lots of potential modalities are going to, I think, suddenly become more flexible. I mean, it was great, the BCC was like, great, send us an email. You want to do curbside pickup, you want to do contactless delivery, no problem. Turn that around in about 5 minutes, right? And so with that sort of precedent, we can go talk to local governments and say, hey, you need to ease up on this, because, we're going to be doing hand-to-hand transactions on the curb, just like the good old days. Just saying, it took us about, 25 years to get back to selling weed on the curb, right in the car windows. But, I mean, lots of weird things. Somebody was complaining to me about a jurisdiction recently where they have a nursery license, but they won't let them have a distribution license. Like, why would you have any kind of supply chain and not let them have distribution? So it seems to me like, as soon as things start to settle down a little and they realize how broke they are going to be open to the kind of rationalization of regulation at the local level that Dominic was talking about doing at the state level. And for some reason, my intuition is that maybe Dominic has something to say about this.
Sorry, I've been engaged in the Q&A chat part, so I missed what you were saying for the last 2 minutes, James. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
No, I mean, Jackie had asked me about, you know, so there we have the state regulations, and you know the local governments can ramp up, more strict, and even ban. You know, can they do downward departure, which, you know, they can do specifically on the 600 feet rule.
Yes.
But what about other things? And then she was suggesting in particular, you know,
zoning, number of retail license or number of licenses allowed certainly is absolutely a local control thing. It's a huge one. But yeah, zoning is another huge one, because you can get all the licenses you want, but if the city or the local jurisdiction is only zoned for like a little tiny area, it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help retail companies stay in business because they're competing right next to each other. And really, I think that relaxing zoning rules is a really important local thing, and also increasing the possibility for other licenses. I mean, there's other more radical, you know, possibilities. Local jurisdictions have local property. They could rent local property to cannabis businesses. They could do it in a cooperative way. They could do it in a bunch of, but they rent property to businesses all the time. And if real estate is a bottleneck and it's in the public interest to deal with that bottleneck, then it's very important to, you know, deal with that. Pardon me, I don't know why there's somebody at my door. I got to go grab that, but yeah.
Maybe I can jump in here.
Jackie, I really want you to talk about how basically you guys gave out a license type that didn't exist yet. And now you're trying to make that license exist. And you're taking that up at the local ballot along with another issue. But you're tackling some big issues locally, you know, and I remember when that application process, you know, was released, and we all were kind of scratching our heads like, this doesn't really match up with state regs. But if a jurisdiction is going to push the envelope, you know, it's going to be a West Hollywood that wins that argument over, you know, a business. And so do tell us a little bit more and go into greater detail. A lot of the questions that are coming in right now are coming in asking about why we even need a consumption lounge license when it says that, you know, we have the right to do it with local authorization. And so
yeah,
you talk a little bit about what's going on there.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try to unpack that because there's a lot inside of there. So the first thing I'll say is that unfortunately, we have really had to struggle with our local jurisdiction. One would think that West Hollywood is typically a very progressive city, and on many issues they are, but on cannabis, they've actually been a lot more difficult to deal with. And one of the things that happened is that they set up a variety of licenses that didn't line up with the state, as you just talked about. And so, for example, on the retail side, they had a separate medical license and a separate adult use license that have never been reconciled together. Even though the state reconciled them, the city still issued two separate licenses. And that's one of the things that our ballot measure is actually trying to do, is reconcile those two to make sure that we're in alignment with the state and we're compliant with the state. And so, because at the end of the day, there really isn't a medical only business model anymore. It doesn't exist. So that there's been some reluctance to that. There's been some reluctance and some opposition to that on the retail side, as far as like Dominic and James have been talking about adding more, and even Steve, adding more numbers of retail. We're simply trying to add, we're not even trying to add, we're trying to just give every retail that's currently existing in the city both distinctions, medical and adult use. It's not an additional location. It's not an additional license. It's simply just expanding what they already have. It's challenging. On the lounge side, the city opted to issue actual lounge licenses that, you're right, there is no state lounge license. And there's actually a model already in place that was in Prop 64 that basically says, if you have a state retail license and your local jurisdiction decides to authorize you for a lounge, that you can go ahead and have that lounge as an ancillary use to your retail license. But what West Hollywood wanted to do, given that it's such a big tourist environment, is they wanted to create standalone lounges that didn't need a retail component to them. And back in 2017, when the ordinance was done, it kind of seemed like a good idea. It was like, oh, cool. So we could have like a restaurant lounge as opposed to a smoking room that's sort of attached to your retail store. And so the idea was good, but the state regulations hadn't been finished yet. And so what happened is that West Hollywood went ahead and certified their ordinance with these standalone lounges, but then the state came around and wrote some regulations that sort of squashed part of that. One of those things being that there's a state regulation that prevents non-cannabis goods from being sold next to cannabis goods. And that translated for a retail store was like, okay, so you don't want a retail store to become 7-Eleven and start selling Doritos. We get that. But for a lounge actually needs to be able to have food and beverage. If you're going to be selling cannabis and having consumption on site, you need to have that food and beverage alongside. People need water, people need food, it's an appetite, stimulant. So we need to be able to break through that. We haven't been able to, and we had a 2-year bill. I know, Jackie, we were talking about this yesterday. We had a 2-year bill with all intention of being able to have it done this year. But now that COVID is around, and if this bill isn't wrapped up in COVID, the likelihood of us being able to pass that in 2020 is pretty slim, unless we can prove that it's part of an essential service. And so as we think out of the box and we look towards creating a model ordinance, which I see some people have been talking about for lounges, we here in West Hollywood have gone down literally every single pathway you could possibly imagine. We've discussed it ad nauseum, not just with our elected officials, but amongst ourselves. We formed local groups. We formed groups at the Chamber of Commerce. We have been so active. We have sent this out to the Brain Trust and said, what could we possibly do about these lounges to make this model work better? And so that's where we came up with the idea of, well, we should be able to have takeout. And so then takeout meaning unopened packages. Well, that seems a little bit like retail, but our lounge license from the city, our local lounge license actually it's called a lounge with adult use retail. So in a way, we sort of do have retail, we sort of don't have retail. So we're trying to figure that out and get that squared away, because otherwise we're never going to be able to have a fluid lounge situation. Now enter coronavirus. So coronavirus, and what this has done is made it so we don't know exactly how these lounges are going to be able to operate, but we do know that there's some critical components to it. One being food and beverage. That's a state level thing. A second being the ability to have takeout. That's a local thing. The third being the ability to add delivery to our license instead of having it be its own individual standalone license. I just got to go out on the limb here and say that the truth is, it seems like what our city probably should have done in hindsight is do something similar to what's happening in other jurisdictions, which is sort of grant everybody everything. I know that the intention was to split us all up and have each person, this business is doing retail, this one's doing cultivation, this one's doing manufacturing, this one's doing distribution. But from a lounge perspective, we sort of do it all, and that's where a micro business was going to come into play. But again, we're not locked up with state regulations and with state law right now. So we're working really hard with our local jurisdiction to try to break through that. And we hope that the pandemic that we're existing in right now was actually going to open up their ears and say, oh, hey, you're right. We actually do need to keep our retailers in business. We do need to give the lounges an opportunity to build a viable business pathway. They may not be able to open their physical lounge space for a while, but if they could still sell products and still, like I said earlier, build that customer acquisition and build a brand that, in X amount of time, when we are able to get back open and we are able to open up and figure all this out, we will have now kind of pushed through all of the roadblocks that we've had from the local level for the last 18 months. I don't know if we're going to get there. I'll be totally honest. There's an incredible amount of opposition, again, from the retailers, nobody else, just the retailers, because they seem to think that they own the market share of West Hollywood and that nobody else should have room for it. And what we're realizing is that as we broke apart cannabis into all these different license types, it's actually making it more difficult, because I was talking a couple of days ago with somebody who said, well, we thought that cannabis was going to make tons and tons of money. And as it turns out, not everybody's doing that. And what we talked about yesterday was, hey, what about the real estate? Our rents and our leases in West Hollywood are exorbitant. And so if these lounges are ever going to have a chance to open, they need all of the tools from the city in order to be able to establish a business, number one. And then number two, we need those rents to come down. And the real question is we have our zoning problem, our zoning issue in West Hollywood is actually not a problem. We have plenty of ample space, but the landlords want to charge so much money because, again, they think that they're taking on a huge risk. They think that there's a lot of money to be made, but let's face it, if we're limited to, if there's 10 tools at the table and we're only allowed to have 2 of them, the chances of us being able to sustain a business is slim to none. And so I think that's where we are right now, is looking at, can this time that we're in right now, where we're in this COVID-19 sort of new thought process, disrupting social experiences, can we find a way forward, and what's that going to look like? Steve D'Angelo and I were talking several months ago about the concept of sanitize equipment, because, you know, there was a situation over at the OG Cannabis Cafe that we don't need to rehash, but we need to talk about social experiences and what that looks like going forward when we're talking about passing around a joint, or we're talking about passing around a bowl. Maybe those things aren't going to happen anymore, but that doesn't mean we can't still have the social experience. We just need to think out of the box. What does that look like? Are we going to be using tips? What are we going to be doing to accommodate all of this new stuff that's now out there? It's a great concept to talk about. But from our perspective, if we do not get the things we need, the basic tools that we need from the local jurisdiction, if they cannot step out of, if they cannot also think out of the box, just like we're talking about here, we may get stuck. And that presents a really big problem for us, because of course, everyone, just like every other cannabis licensee up and down the state, has spent a lot of money, has spent a lot of time, has done all kinds of things to get to this place. And we just want to be able to open. We just want to be able to have a business and try to build something that finally creates a legal and safe space for cannabis users to come out and consume without the threat of being shut down, or without the threat of law enforcement coming in, or any of that. It's like we're finally are there, and then we got pushed back about 10 steps. So I think that that's where our challenges are right now. But as far as our passion and our intention of creating this ordinance and fixing this ordinance so that it becomes a model ordinance for lounges, standalone lounges around the country, really, we're still very, very dedicated to that. It's a lot of work. We have a lot of advocates on board. We've got a lot of people that dedicate unbelievable amounts of time to this without getting paid, as usual, because they believe in it and they believe it's the right thing to do. We're hoping that we're going to get some love from the state as it relates to food and beverage. We don't know if we're going to get that given the COVID situation. And so it's really a challenge for us right now. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Jackie. I had the honor of attending a WeHo City Council meeting, and I was blown away. I think I had been doing a lot of work in Calaveras County at the time, and so when I came down for a visit and I attended a meeting, I mean, your council members wanted cannabis food trucks and cannabis to be delivered on bicycles and cannabis ice cream and, all of these things. And I just remember thinking, well, if anyone's going to get it done, it's going to be WeHo. So I'm rooting for you. And it just means that you're going to have to run a better campaign than the other retailers, right? We'll help you.
Thank you. We're going to need your help at some point, so we'll call on you.
So we are really running out of time. This has been such an amazing panel, but I have one question that I want everybody to ask. I told them that this was probably the question I would be coming to them with. And that is, if you had a silver bullet, and you could aim it at the local level, at the state level, or at the federal level, what would it be, and what would the goal be? And I'll start with James.
Okay, quickly, I might cheat and have 2 silver bullets. So number 1 always is organize, organize, organize. We need to be activists. We need to be activists at both the state and local level. Support at least one of your state organizations, not only with, a little whatever dues paying membership, but also with your active engagement in committees and events, whether that's Americans for Safe Access, which none of us would be here without them, Same for California normal. CCIA, shameless plug, I'm on the board. At the local level, form your own. If there isn't one, if there is one, join it. If there isn't one, start an ACID chapter, start a normal chapter, start your own thing. I would advise that you keep it medical, and remember, medical includes both Prop 64 over the counter, formerly known as adult use, and doctor recommended for higher dosages and amounts. It is local, local, local. You can impact those races, right? Participate in local politics. You know, check out city council and planning commission once in a while, even when it's not even cannabis related. They are spending your money. Track their budget, track who's running, talk to them, interview them. You can influence a local race. For that matter, you can run. I am proud to have longtime associations with cannabis, medical cannabis, in both Vallejo and South Lake Tahoe, both of which have cannabis dispensary operators on their city councils. In Vallejo, an African-American council member, longtime dispensary operator. 4 years ago, he was acquitted of a cultivation charge in Napa, the most abysmal racist BS I've ever seen in my life. Second thing is initiative. Run initiatives. You have great, participate in local government, but as Jackie has demonstrated, you can make a local law. Run them, especially in Southern California. The county of Los Angeles alone has like 200 cities. Just run initiatives. Small cities are an easy target, and if nothing else, you can use it as leverage to negotiate with city council. You either like pass this or work out a deal with us, or we're taking it to the voters. Finally, you'll start to hear, I hope, things about initiative reform. Initiative is broken in California, particularly in the context of COVID-19. Jackie got lucky and squeaked in, but a lot of fine measures, local and state, aren't going to be on the ballot because we couldn't collect signatures after 2019 or after March 16th, March 19th. Can't do it by mail, can't do it online. That is ridiculous. We need to fix that at the legislature.
Thank you, James. Dominic.
Well, I like how James set me up because really the end game is local. Freedom trickles up, not down. And really, you know, engaging. I think that the one thing I want to say in addition to what James is saying, not to be repetitive, is that show that you are part of your local community. That includes non-cannabis community organizations and people, that you are part of the local fabric. And honestly, like what this crisis is definitely demonstrating in this country is that like, we can't look upward for help. We have to look to each other, the people that we see and can have compassion for with their suffering and really be together with. And it's super, super important. So all the things James said.
I want to quote you on that. Was that a freedom trickles upward, not down?
Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it. Love it. Love it. Jackie.
I think honestly, my silver bullet would go right into the heart of local jurisdictions. And I think that I wish that it would spread some magic fairy dust all over them to realize that their political motives, their bureaucracy, and their overregulation is not going to work. It's going to backfire on them. The visions of grandeur that they had are simply, they simply cannot work this way. It's difficult enough just in the state to open up a cannabis business, to apply, to get licensed, to go through all of the compliance and all the regulations and at the state level. And then you add on this additional layer at the local level that is sometimes, you know, really kind of selfish to be totally frank. And so I think that that's where I would like to see happen. I'd like to see local jurisdictions welcome cannabis instead of adding tons and tons and tons of barriers that we have to jump through that really just aren't possible. So that's my wish. Magic fairy dust on the local jurisdictions.
Well, here's some breaking news. I'm going to quote Maximilian Michelonis, who sent a text that says, the Department of Finance released a memo today that projects a $54.3 billion hole in the state budget. That is nearly 3.5 times the state's rainy day fund emergency reserves. Rainy day fund emergency reserves. So the bigger that this bloodbath gets, you know, the more opportunity there's going to be for us. And we just need, maybe we need to unite on the messaging, because I really, like, I'm just so inspired by everyone on this panel. And I'm gonna let Steve take us out with what his silver bullet would be, where he would aim it, and then tell us how we can all help out with Last Prisoner Project.
I would take one silver bullet and aim it at the federal level at the Controlled Substances Act and remove cannabis entirely from the Controlled Substances Act. That's going to make everything else that we're trying to do at the state level, at the local level, much, much easier. Then I would fire two more silver bullets at the state level. Number one, I would create a 2-year tax holiday for all California licensed cannabis businesses. The second silver bullet at the state level in California would require the state of California to double the number of cannabis licenses in all categories within a year. No ifs, ands, or buts. They have to double them. They can figure out the best way to do that, but they got to double them. We need twice as many licenses. So those are my silver bullets. In terms of the Last Prisoner Project, we make it really easy for cannabis businesses to plug in, retailers. We have a program for retailers. We have a program for manufacturers. We have a way that almost everybody can plug in. The first step is to go to lastprisonerproject.org and drop us your email, and then we'll be in touch and we can explore all of those options.
Yay, thank you guys so much. This has really been a great panel. I am honored to be brainstorming with some of the best and brightest in the industry, and I look forward to doing this again. Thank you, Susan, for having all of us and for taking time out of your schedule to put this together.
Thank you so much, you guys. I just wanted to say, Steve, you introduced me to a new term on our practice called common carrier service. And when I was talking to Lou Carrera this morning, he said, what do you guys need? What do you want? And I said, we need to be able to ship cannabis legally, you know, across the country, through the state, whatever. And he said, do you want to use the US Post Office? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, well, send me an email and say, hey, Lou, do your job. This is what I need. And then I can take it. And so here we go. There's an answer.
Yeah, no, common carrier service will make a huge difference. Thank you, Susan, for all the good work you do, especially stitching together the cannabis community and the regulatory community and helping us really understand each other. I think that is such important and really critical work for us to move this thing forward. So thank you for playing that really important mediating role.
I second that.
Thank you, guys. Okay, panelists, I'm going to demote you to attendees so you don't have to log out. I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to have a little break. Go grab some food. I'm going to show Steve's commercial again one more time. So thank you. Let's continue this conversation. First Thursdays. Let's do it again next month.
The Last Prisoner Project has one single-minded purpose: to make sure that as a legal industry is built, our sisters and brothers still behind bars have a chance to come home and rebuild their lives. The Last Prisoner Project promises you and every cannabis prisoner in the world that we will not stop, we will not rest until the last cannabis prisoner comes home. Please help us with a donation.